Robert Taylor, you were born in 1940
Yes,
and you grew up in St. John the Baptist Parish. I think it's about 30 miles west of New Orleans, just north of the river.
yes.
Describe the town. Like, who lives there? What kind of place is it?
It was a town that was actually created by the sugar cane industry.
Uh,
I can remember going out the backyard and pull a sugar cane out the ground and eat it.
I want you guys to meet someone I spent some time with
Call
recently.
them stalks.
Robert Taylor. He was in Louisiana. I was in New York City. It was like a porch chat, but virtual. We talked about his life and all the changes he's seen in the place where he grew up.
I lived about a half block off the refinery itself in housing that was provided by the company for its employees.
Huh. At that time when you're growing up, how do you know that you live in Sugarland? Sounds like you're literally eating the food.
Yes, exactly. Well, I didn't know anything else. I don't know, by the time I was a teenager is when I began to realize there was a world outside of sugar. But I was quite happy and content as a kid living in that environment and in that culture. It's what everybody relied on. That was our way of life.
Robert grew up along the Mississippi, the great American river, where something like 40% of the land in this country, the lower 48, drains from as far north as Montana, all the way across the Midwest to the Great Lakes, the Ohio River, the Wabash River, the Tennessee River, all the way through western Pennsylvania, even to the edge of states like North Carolina. That whole stretch of land, it drains down one channel, one funnel, the Mississippi River. All the sediment slides through there. For a lot of reasons, the land around the Mississippi River is valuable, precious. So many people have wanted it. Traders, slavers, and for almost the last century, the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry wanted it. They dug up graves, exhuming the bones of the dead. Sometimes they built right on tops of graves in cemeteries. They dug a vast network of oil and gas pipelines. They carved into the land, cutting across wetlands, across various ecosystems. Some of that carving took place when Robert was a young man. Okay, so if I'm walking around in that area, how do I start to notice that the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry is coming in?
Well, the first time it was brought to my attention, it was by my wife. I can remember her asking me, Bobby, what's going on over there on what was then Bell Point Plantation, which was just a few blocks from our house. And I hadn't noticed the construction, even me being in construction, but she did. And I didn't know this was 1963, the year that we got married. So by the time our fourth and last child was brought home, that plant has been built and went into operation the year that Raven came home, our baby. But growing up, as the kids growing up, they would always come in complaining about odors or about chest pains because of some odors and smells they were getting. But all of that was new to us.
The area where Robert lives has one of the highest concentrations of fossil fuel and petrochemical plants in the Western Hemisphere. It's got the highest risk of cancer from industrial air pollution in the country. It's called Cancer Alley, an 85-mile stretch of land along the tail end of the Mississippi River from the capital, Baton Rouge, which is inland, to New Orleans, where the nation's rivers pour out like a bowl into the Gulf of Mexico. In Robert's corner of the river, there are people, there are communities, there are houses and schools just across the fence line from giant refineries. And that's what I wanted to talk to Robert about. This is Rights and Wrongs, a podcast from Human Rights Watch. I'm Goffin Budubwele. I'm a writer, a lawyer, and a radio producer. Human Rights Watch asks me to look at the human rights hotspots around the world through the eyes and ears of the people on the front lines of history. So you grow up there, you get into the construction business, you get married, you get your own land. Why did you want to buy a plot of land?
Well, that was the American dream, to own a home. You know, if you're thinking about marriage and a family, for me, that's what really drove me to make sure that I did have something, a legacy, something to leave for my children, you know, which is one of the things my father used to always say to me, that it was unfortunate that he felt bad about it, but I thought he did a wonderful job, but he instilled that in me to plan ahead for our children in our future.
What was your father, what did he feel regret about?
Well, he and my mom separated when I was 4 years old. She left him. And so he moved away, and he wasn't able to have me as close to him as we were in those first 4 years, which was precious to me, the memories of the love and care that he gave me. And so at 10 years old, I found him again, and he vowed never ever to lose contact with me. And he worked very hard, worked on the railroad. He bought land and built the family home that he gave to my mother and the new guy she was living with, because we weren't doing very well without him. So he extended his help anyway to us. And that's when he always would tell me, you see how hard I got to work? I want you to go to school and get a good education so that you can take care of your family and don't have to work as hard as I'm working.
And can you just tell me, like, about the importance of owning land to your father?
He knew about slavery. He was born in 1898.
Mm-hmm.
His dad was born into slavery, and his grandfather. What he wanted for us, for me, his emphasis was on education and economics. You have to acquire land and make sure that your children understand that they need to work towards the future of their children, to keep our legacy whole. So acquire land. First, make your peace with God. He was a religious man. And then go about building your family in a way that they could live happily.
I wonder if you could just actually just like describe that plot of land to me. Like, what does it look like?
The plot that I acquired,
Yes, sir.
it wasn't anything where I could do farming. It was a 60 by 90 foot plot of land, and I could build a home on it.
Hmm.
The initial home that I was able to acquire, it was a 920 square foot, 3-bedroom home. But immediately I started to expand on that. And in 2 years, I turned that into a 7-bedroom home.
Mm.
I had learned the building trades, so that's why I was able to do that. And I was encouraged by my wife because she was right at my side, whatever I was trying to do. And it was a 2-story building, and people would pass by and see me and her. She would be on that roof right beside me. People would actually stop and scream up there, tell her to get down from there. You must be crazy. What are you doing on that roof? You know, no, but we did everything. We worked hard, and we were able to build a real nice home for our family.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say a home, I'm talking about the community. Our home was the center of activity in the community.
When you got your plot of land, is that sort of what it meant to you? Like, what's going through your mind is like you got that thing that your dad had told you.
Very, very much so. What really was a blessing to me, and I hope to him, was in his later years, he got ill and couldn't work anymore. But I had built a home, and When we went to visit him and found out in the hospital, and they told us that he was going to have to go from there to a nursing home, and my wife wouldn't hear it. She said, "No, Dad is coming home with us." And we took him home with us. Our children fell in love with him. And I'm thankful that we were able to have him in his latter years. He died happily with us, and all of us was happy to have had him.
So at 25, you get this plot of land, and eventually your dad comes back, settles there, which means your kids grow up with him around.
Yeah,
So as you're buying this land, buying it and building, at that same time, the petrochemical industry is starting to come into the region.
yes.
What do you think at that time? Is that like, when companies come in, usually that means jobs. What are you thinking about it at the time as it's coming in initially?
I really didn't have much thoughts in that direction because I had always been self-employed and I never worked in the parish. But there was one guy, my next door neighbor, who did get a job at the plant,
Hmm.
and they were very prosperous. He would buy a brand new Lincoln Continental, and park on his driveway. And as the kids grew up, he would buy them nice, expensive cars. Yeah, you could tell a difference in in our community, somebody who's got a good job like that. And his lifestyle was decidedly different from the rest of the people in the community.
So I want to bring in, for the listeners, they don't know, there's another person here with us, your daughter, Tish. So you had 4 kids.
Yes.
Tish, what number are
Number
you?
one.
Oh, you're number one. Okay. Okay.
Yes, I
Eldest.
am.
And so, Tish, when your dad mentioned the Lincolns, the new cars, you were nodding your head. Do you have any memories of sort of like either the new cars or how the neighbors who were working at the plant, they seemed a little bit wealthier?
Absolutely. They were the family that had it. It was the nice cars. Now, my dad didn't mention was that he was also a musician. So he had a band.
Okay.
Now, they had nice cars and they probably had nicer clothes. But across the street from them, we had it going on. We had the swing set, we had the musicians every Tuesday and Thursday. The cars are lined up, people in the street listening to the band practice. So we had it going on over there. Everybody came over to the Taylor house. So the whole community watched him add on to that house with cash because he did not believe in getting in debt. So first the front was brick, then it had arches, then it was next thing you know, we tore the roof off and put a whole new roof. And everybody was just like, wow, when is it gonna stop? And he was like, I got a family. We have to have room. We need this to be the compound, which it turned into, the family compound.
Okay, so near this house, the family compound, the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry built a plant. Robert and Tish and basically everyone who lives there refer to the plant as DuPont. But in 2015, a Japanese company called Denka bought it. It makes neoprene, a synthetic rubber that's used in things like wetsuits, fan belts, boots, leggings. The process releases a toxic pollutant called chloroprene. Can you describe, Tish, your childhood memories of what the plant looked like?
I thought it was a beautiful city. And I thought when we passed there that I knew I was close to home because it was a city with all those bright lights.
What did it smell like?
The smells were not all the time. It's just like certain atmospheric things happening, when it's really foggy. Most of the time at night, you get the smells. Raining and stuff like that. I guess when the atmosphere is heavy, it kind of hovers low. So we would get the smells then. It'd give you a headache, it wasn't comfortable, but it was just what we knew. I was 4 when they started the neoprene plant. And obviously all the smells came from there. And somewhere in that process, from the production of the neoprene, because chloroprene is actually odorless. A lot of the chemicals that we're exposed to are odorless.
Hi, this is Tarana Hassan, the Executive Director of Human Rights Watch. At Human Rights Watch, we investigate and report on abuses happening in every corner of the world. We're journalists, country experts, lawyers, and other professionals who are doing everything we can to expose perpetrators and to help protect vulnerable people. We're a non-profit, but to keep our independence, we don't take money from governments. And that's why we rely on support from people like you. If you value what we do, please donate. Go to hrw.org/podcast/donate. That's hrw.org/podcast/donate. Thank you.
Did you have any health problems when you were growing up?
Just sinus problems, allergies, sinuses. I was taking sinus medicine by the time I was in 5th grade. And all of us had that. We all were taking prescription medication for sinus infections at young ages.
Okay.
Well, that's just the area we live in. That's what they said. That's just the area we live in. Because as I was growing up, there was more and more industrial facilities being built.
My sinus problems were so severe that my doctor would have to treat me once a week. He'd bring me in and rub cotton on a stick and stick it all the way up my nose and make me sit in his office for a half hour with it. Then one of my wife's cousins came from Los Angeles to visit, and she saw our house that I had built. And she asked me, would you come to California and do this to my house? When I went to California, my sinuses disappeared. And the minute I came back home, it started over again because of the environment that I was living in.
As Tish mentioned earlier, over time, the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry built more and more plants in the region. And now there's an estimated 200 plants in Cancer Alley. I asked Tish, how did you figure out that in the community as a whole, people were getting sick?
Well, first, our next door neighbor across the street was diagnosed with cancer. He had throat cancer. So he talked differently after he had the surgery. He had like a whisper almost kind of voice, and so that was the first time we ever heard of cancer. And then my grandmother was diagnosed with bone cancer. One of the neighbors a few houses down was diagnosed with cancer. And it just started the conversation in the community itself was, all these people are getting sick, and that wasn't like that before. It's got to be all these plants that's coming in our neighborhoods that's doing this. And that was it, because we felt helpless anyway. There's no way we can do anything about it. But it was like under the surface, we all felt the same, that all the illnesses were not, that was a whole generation of things that we had not experienced. Daddy's generation had not experienced it, but now people are getting very ill. My brother had kidney disease. He was in and out of the hospital all our childhood. My sister always had problems with digestive problems. Years later, she was diagnosed with gastroparesis, which is her stomach was paralyzed, and then her large intestine. And when she went and actually got some serious in-depth testing, she was diagnosed with some rare autoimmune disease. My generation, our generation of families were having miscarriages. But as we grew into being adults, we started having more of our generation having cancer in their 20s and 30s. And it's like we're burying our classmates, and they're 30 years old. We're burying classmates. From then on, it was just normal for us to have, this one had cancer. Oh, they survived cancer. And other rare autoimmune diseases.
Tish went on about all the sickness in her family and community.
It's rampant, but we always hear someone say rare diseases. My mom was diagnosed with thrombocytosis, where the blood platelets in her bone marrow make too many platelets, so her blood is thick, and she's taking leukemia medicine. It's a blood disease. And then later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
She talked about illnesses among workers in plants, including Tish's ex-husband.
Prostate cancer, kidney cancer, colon cancer. A lot of them have passed.
She went on for like
from
5 minutes.
And our next door neighbor across the street, he had prostate cancer.
Did it ever cross your minds to be like, maybe we got to sell this and leave?
No, it was home.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know that it wasn't like that anywhere else because we were a small community. We didn't travel a lot. We might have went visit somebody, but we were right back home. And you visit someone along the river and everybody's living the same life. And you have to remember, this is not the time of having social media or anybody investigating anything. There's no data that we could look up, even though we might not have had the capacity to look it up anyway. We weren't involved politically. And another plant came in and another plant came in. And we just were getting sicker. You know, I love telling this story about my dad. My mom calls me one morning. She's like, your dad has lost his mind. And I'm like, what's going on? And she said, your daddy called 911 on DuPont. And I'm like, stop the madness. What do you think they're going to do, arrest him? But daddy tell him what else happened.
Yeah, I called 911, you know, which we had been instructed if we smell strange odors to call. So I called 911 and the fire department showed up. They always get there first. The police come. Then here come the fire chief about 5 minutes later. And we're all out in front of the house. And he jumps out of his car and comes towards us. And he stopped dead in his track and he looked around. And he said, oh my God, how do they expect you people to live like this? He was shocked at the power of that odor. There's just something about it. And especially for people like him, you know, he's a professional, he'd been in these, but he don't live in reserve. All of the whites that moved out north of the parish, north of the airline highway, didn't get the direct effect like this.
Why did they leave, or like how'd they know to leave?
They started leaving in 62 and 63. At the start of construction. By the time 69, when that plant really went into effect, our population had switched, man. The demographics of our that had changed dramatically. All the whites were gone. 92% of the victims in Cancer Alley are black. That's not coincidental. In every parish you go in, the white population is secluded off in the safest area in the parish. There's no way around that. That is too obvious. Knowledge is key. So you have to inform yourself so that how can you protect yourself if you don't know that you're being threatened and you don't even know who your enemies are? See, you don't know that it's the hand that is supposedly feeding you that is really poisoning you. What are those people working in this industry here? What do they do when they find out that those little jobs is going to cause the destruction of their generations? Not just them, but generations of our people are going to be destroyed because they're able to buy a new car every few years. One or two people. I think it's horrible for those people to say, well, we brought jobs to the community. I mean, what are they talking about? You can kill all this amount of people just because you gave a handful of people a job? How do humans begin to sit and weigh somebody's health and life and the generation against this person who's working and got a job?
In 2010, after a whole lot of studies, the Environmental Protection Agency came out and they classified chloroprene as a likely human carcinogen. And they set a limit, 0.2 micrograms. And that was a really big deal. So you had this like finally an official statement from an official source being like, this is the correct level, or this is the level that is tolerable. Since then, and even before then, you guys have been engaged in all kinds of activism and advocacy to try to change the situation.
I mean, you mentioned the 0.2 suggestion that the EPA made. That was a suggestion. And as the head of the Louisiana Department of Health, Mr. Jimmy Guidry, told us that there is no such thing as a safe level of exposure for human beings to chloroprene. When we entered into this fight specifically because of what DuPont Dinker was putting up on those poor, unsuspecting school children, hundreds of times over the level, which we know that level was hundreds of times too dangerous anyway. And then now they are getting away with not even adhering to that 0.2. And then those people were licensed by the state of California to do. Huh?
Louisiana.
The state of, who did I say?
California.
Oh my God. The state of Louisiana. That's what DuPont brag about right now. Oh no, it was in the law. Your government said we can dump this amount of poison. Oh yeah, that's a couple of thousand times over what is a safe level. But so what? Who are the victims of it? Oh, well, that's the sacrifice zone. Don't you understand?
So what we have here are two very different standards. The federal government, or the EPA, wants to see tighter limits imposed on emissions of chloroprene, but the state of Louisiana isn't enforcing that standard. And Denka, the new owner of the plant, has continued to release chloroprene at many, many times the EPA's recommended level. The children Robert was talking about go to a school right near the facility.
Kindergarten through 5th grade, black kids who are bussed in from all over the parish to that school.
When we asked Denka for comment, the company replied, quote, "There is no imminent endangerment near the Denka Performance Elastomer, or DPE, La Place facility." The quote continues, "Real-world evidence backs that up, as borne out by Louisiana tumor registry data demonstrating an absence of increased cancer in the community, a finding vetted and confirmed by the EPA itself." Denka also said, quote, "Since the purchasing of the facility in 2010, DPE has invested over $35 million to reduce chloroprene emissions, which have fallen by 85% and now sit at the lowest level since the plant began operations. The fence line monitoring system confirms that chloroprene emissions remain at historically low levels. DPE remains firmly committed to its ongoing efforts to reduce emissions while continuing its operations." Close quote. New EPA rules give Denka 90 days to reduce its emissions of chloroprene. Denka is suing the EPA in federal appeals court, and they responded to us by saying that the EPA has, quote, "singled out the company and, quote, unlawfully imposed a 90-day compliance period that is impossible to meet." Denka said it was challenging the 90-day time frame, along with what it described as, quote, "EPA's steadfast refusal to consider the most recent science on chloroprene risk in setting the requirements of the rule," close quote. According to Denka's website, the company believes that the EPA's 0.2 limit overstates the risk of cancer by a factor of 130 times.
Samuel Miller, 40 acres on Edisto.
Fergus Wilson, 40 acres on Sapelo Island.
Primus Morrison, 40 acres on Edisto.
More than 1,200 formerly enslaved people got land from the federal government and then had it taken away.
This was a betrayal.
I'm Al Letson, host of the Reveal podcast. Our new series, 40 Acres and a Lie, is available now. Subscribe to Reveal wherever you get your podcasts.
Meanwhile, policymakers in Louisiana debate to what extent there's any cancer risk at all.
The Mississippi River is, full of petrochemical plants as well as grain elevators because they are truly the gateway to the world.
This is Republican State Senator Eddie Lambert. He's the chairman of the Environmental Quality Committee. Just this past April, the PBS NewsHour journalist William Brangham interviewed Senator Lambert about Cancer Alley.
I'm sure your committee has seen the number of studies that have linked living in these areas to disproportionately high negative health outcomes. You don't accept that as a premise?
I don't accept that as a complete truism. I mean, there may be some correlations. I mean, I'm going to tell you, let's start looking Vaccines. We've had an explosion of vaccines in the last, 20, 30 years. Now you have autism. Is there a connection there? I don't know. There's a lot of people who think they are.
There's a lot of people who think there are, but there's no good evidence that they are connected.
And that may be the same thing with some of the situations with the chemical plants. There's, circumstantial evidence that's there. But you know what? Let's really dig down and see what is what is there.
Human Rights Watch recently spent a lot of time looking at what's there. They interviewed Tish and Robert, that's how we found them, and dozens of other residents. They also looked very closely at many health studies on the effects that the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry has had on the region. And it's been devastating, with Cancer Alley having the highest risk of cancer from industrial air pollution of any location in the entire nation at 7 times the national average. In 2016, Robert founded Concerned Citizens of St. John, a nonprofit that's fighting with residents and groups throughout the region and the state for the health and safety of Cancer Alley's residents. They want the state of Louisiana, or failing that, the federal government, to pass tighter regulations. Other local residents have called for a moratorium on new fossil fuel and petrochemical plants in the region. These community organizing efforts are bearing fruit. Robert and Tish have been to the White House to attend a ceremony with President Biden strengthening federal environmental justice provisions. They've led Michael Regan, the head of the EPA, on tours of Cancer Alley. They've seen the EPA pass new rules restricting the pollution these plants can emit and monitor more tightly. In spite of all this, Robert doesn't live in the house he built anymore. In 2021, a hurricane destroyed the home. Robert didn't have the insurance to rebuild. Meanwhile, Robert's been living at Tish's house nearby in Laplace. Imagine yourself there for a second. From Tish's house, you can hear the sounds of trains carrying fossil fuel and petrochemicals day and night. Fly up into the sky and look out further. See the hundreds of fossil fuel and petrochemical operations dotting the land on both sides of the river. In the areas with the worst pollution, hear the children born with low birth weight at 3 times the national average. Preterm birth rates almost 2.5 times the national average. Preterm birth is a leading cause of infant mortality. Now, come back down to the ground. You talked about your dad having given you advice of how to sort of steward, go to school, build this thing for your family. What do you think, if your dad was able to see the situation, what kind of advice do you think your dad would have given you?
My dad was an ordained minister. He was a very religious man. And the level of evil that's involved here, I don't think he had conceived that. I tremble at leaving my children that property over there. And this is going to continue to be a sacrifice zone. Then if my children stay there, they'll be sacrificed. There's no future there.
Human Rights Watch has released a detailed report of the impact of extreme pollution from the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry on residents of Cancer Alley. You can read the report, you can watch a video in which Robert and Tish appear, and so much more via www.hrw.org. You've been listening to Rights and Wrongs from Human Rights Watch. This episode was produced by me and Curtis Fox. Our associate producer is Sophie Soloway. Thanks also to Ife Fatunase, Stacey Sullivan, and Anthony Gale. I'm Gofen Putubuele. See you next time.